Hello, everyone. I'm Shawnta Jackson, and welcome to Connections. Connections is our opportunity as professionals to make the most out of networking, career development, career growth, and business growth via unscripted live chats with like-minded individuals who inspire and inform. We are streaming live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So please do enter your questions and comments in the chat box. And my next guest is Ramon Llamas. And Ramon is an independent public health consultant and also a social entrepreneur that I've had the opportunity to connect with via LinkedIn. Please do, again, enter your questions and comments in the chat box. And if you haven't already, please do connect with me on LinkedIn if you are watching from a different platform. And this episode is brought to you by my favorite travel agent, Amber Jackson of Ambient Journeys. And I've worked with Amber to plan various personal and business travel, including retreats and conferences and summits and different things like that. So if you're in the process of planning your 2021, 2022, or even beyond events, please do contact Amber Jackson, and her website is ambientjourneys.com. And at this time, I'll bring on my guest, Ramon. Hey, Ramon, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Shawnta. How are you?
You know, I'm doing really good. It's Wednesday. It's been a busy day for me. Every other Wednesday is pretty busy. Next Wednesday won't be, but it's been pretty busy for me. I did share this announcement in my mailing list. Actually, I do, Ramon, and now I hear the echo. Do you hear it? There's
a little bit.
Yeah, there's a little. So while I'm speaking, if you don't mind, if you can try to put your headphones on. So everyone, again, this is live, and so it happens, right? But I did share on my mailing list, in addition to promotion and for today's show and Ramon's bio, I also shared some time-sensitive resources on my email list, which include some funding opportunities, for example, the Office of Minority Health, some public health or nonprofit foundations, and then also some small business grant resources for women-owned businesses. So please do, if you haven't, please do subscribe to my mailing list at shawntajackson.com or causeengagement.com. Okay, Ramon, we're all good now. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yes, and much better. We probably should have did that in the first place. So Ramon, you and we connected via LinkedIn a few years ago. We did have the opportunity to have an exploratory meeting just to kind of get to know each other. And I believe that probably has been a good 2 years ago. And at that time, you were in the process of relocating to North Carolina, correct?
Actually, I've been here in Durham for about 7 years now. So I may have been potentially relocating. I was thinking about going to Baltimore, actually, in 2018. So that could have been it.
Okay, I think that's probably what it was. And so tell us a little bit about just your background and some of the projects that you're working on right now.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to explain sometimes, but the easiest way to say it is like I do independent consulting around public health strategy, and so for example, one of my big clients, or one of my main clients, is a national nonprofit called Community Campus Partnerships for Health, and I've been helping the leadership evolve the traditional nonprofit model to a more sustainable social enterprise model, which includes looking for opportunities to build in a consulting arm. So bringing in revenue outside of just traditional grant cycles.
Okay, because one of your interests is the intersections between finance, innovation, and social impact. So if I were to work with you, or if someone were to reach out to you, whether it be a national nonprofit association or someone local, you can kind of help them to improve their, I guess, fee for service, or create fee for service.
Yeah, so it's trying to evolve nonprofits to think more entrepreneurially and respond in a more, I guess, plan it out a little better, so that you're not just going after grants, which are not guaranteed. And helping nonprofit leaders realize that writing all the effort that it takes to write a grant, and not get feedback or any kind of or not even get it at all, or not get feedback, is a losing proposition. And so trying to help with the sustainability of the organization long term, by providing extra ideas around how to bring in revenue.
And how does that process work?
We just talk through it. I kind of examine, I do a full assessment of where the organization has been, and then compare it to kind of the market trends, whatever's going on in the market. For example, for CCPH, they've been around for 25 years, and it originally was founded around community-based participatory research. And they're really focused on community engagement. And right now, especially from COVID and from all the social unrest that went on in 2020, there's a huge focus on community engagement. And so we're really trying to position CCPH as an organization to be closely working with communities, and then bringing other sectors to the mix from a partnership perspective, to be able to solve more complex social issues, and really try to collaborate on a larger level.
Okay. So you have to remind me. I have a question or comment regarding community engagement and follow up with evaluation. But first, back to what you were saying about just grant writing, and a lot of nonprofits, they focus on the traditional funding streams. However, to my knowledge, the biggest sources of revenue usually for nonprofits are individual donations. So in addition to grant writing, I also think that there is an opportunity for sponsorship. Susan G. Komen and a lot of the larger nonprofit organizations, they do a really great job with this. Is that something that you have experience with, or something that you are considering doing, like as far as helping nonprofits develop sponsorship decks and just kind of like the brand and the products behind those?
Yeah, so part of it, yeah, thank you for kind of highlighting that. The donor base is definitely huge. And there's not, smaller nonprofits that aren't really super sophisticated and don't have the staff to be able to hire professionals that really can fundraise, have trouble. And that's kind of been my focus for nonprofit clients, is kind of building a base of what you're good at, right? And then kind of leveling up from there, right? So I think our next thing for CCPH is looking for those donors after we build a consulting arm and build the revenue up. How do we also add other channels of revenue in the future? But yeah, I think I don't have direct experience from that side of things, but I do help from a branding and thought leadership and just an overall organizational perspective.
So we just identified a niche, right? A niche. We've just identified an opportunity through this conversation for sponsorship and connecting with corporations and their marketing departments, and or not just corporations and their marketing departments, but also the agencies that they hire. So their ad agencies, their PR agencies, connecting with those individuals and maybe educating them on the opportunities to work with nonprofits or the issues at hand. And I think this will align with not just their foundations, with their corporate social responsibility, but also with some of their cost marketing efforts as well.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to add to all those great points that you made is that partnering with a nonprofit, if you're a private sector company, you can partner with nonprofits and go in on grants that you're not usually able to apply for as a for-profit company, right? So for example, foundation grants, some of those corporate social responsibility dollars only go to nonprofit agencies, and then there's some holdouts for federal level grants or state level, right? So for nonprofits. So that's part of what I've been doing with my client, is really examining what's available in terms of money, and going from there. And they really liked the the angle of service provision. So being like building this consulting arm, and really trying to evolve from there. Yeah, and I think the sky's the limit. And I think in the future for nonprofits to really survive, they have to think more entrepreneurially.
Yes, and as it relates to, you mentioned businesses that traditionally don't qualify for a certain type of funding. Do you work with the business as well and help them to identify fiscal sponsorship or consultation on that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely, like, it depends on, the relationship that we built, but usually all my clients, like, I've helped them in some capacity or another, thinking about the future prospects of the business and how to grow it. So I've worked with nonprofits and for-profits, early stage startups, all the way to just actual funded venture-backed startups. So run the gamut in terms of who I've worked with. But I think for me, I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with companies that I want to work with, and so it adds a little extra motivation because I want to help as much as I can from my end.
Yes, and that's always the best, to work with companies and organizations and teams that you want to work with. I think I think I have a pretty good personality, and I'm a fun person to work with. And I think because of that, sometimes people, they want you on their team and they want your organization and your team to work with them, but they're not always the most organized. And sometimes they bring you too much into the weeds. And when you meet with them, you find yourself walking away with more and more tasks, and
Yep.
you can't really concentrate and focus on the other things that you should be doing as it relates to client service to your other clients, and or as a business owner as it relates to marketing and sales. And so I guess that's the difference between a business owner and an operator. And sometimes as consultants, we have to make sure that we don't get stuck to where that one client is taking up all of our time and it's not enjoyable. Then it makes it not enjoyable just because they're taking up your time.
Exactly. And sometimes, early on, I've had clients that expected me to do a lot of those things and go to all these meetings and then still have the deliverables. It got to a point where it's taken up, it's almost like a full-time job, but you're not getting like a full-time, salary plus the benefits that come with like a full-time job. Right. So, yeah, I think it's just like kind of personal assessment at that point of, hey, where's my time going? And am I focusing on the skills that I want to really be focusing on? Or am I just doing a lot of admin stuff because I'm this external consultant and they wanted me to do everything under the sun?
Yes, and I think this topic is important for consultants at all levels, but especially some of the newer consultants. Naturally, sometimes you don't build up that exterior or that strength to set boundaries and to say no, and to and to bring that up to your client and say, excuse me, that's not in my scope. I've had clients be pretty upset with me, but I was okay with them being upset with me because that's not in my scope of work and that's not the deliverable that we set forth. However, if this is something that you would like to do, we can adjust or renegotiate the contract. But yeah, people have to value you, and you have to value yourself, and you have to make people respect and value you. So we do have some questions and comments in the chat. I still haven't forgotten about that community engagement and that evaluation question, but let's check in and see who's watching. We have Lorinda McKelvey checking in, and let's see, she has a few questions. Let's see. How does the approach being described, how is it different from a social enterprise? And so, and she also referenced a YMCA model. And she wants to know, in your opinion, is that considered a social enterprise model?
Yeah, I mean, so my definition of social enterprise is an organization that has a social mission, and I think nonprofit or for profit. I think the only difference is like the tax designation, but I think all of these companies or organizations can be social enterprises is that, but I think the differentiator from like a traditional nonprofit business model is that, hey, we focus on grants, we're trying to get money in through there, or donors, versus a social enterprise, in my view, is somebody who like generates like quote unquote products, right? So I try to teach my client around like, how do we develop products from the existing intellectual knowledge or capacity that we have, right? So all these trainings and workshops that you've done in the past, or all these publications, that could be packaged in a product that where you're an expert in community engagement, right? So that's kind of a product mindset. And how do you, the reason why I say like product mindset is then you can operationalize it and you can put processes together so that you can have people work on those specific products and then scale it from there. I think so. Social enterprise, I think it's the ability to scale, whether it's expanding programs or services like the YMCA does, or expanding to different areas, right? So there's YMCA chapters across the country, across the world, probably. And so for my client specifically, this nonprofit was serving like the nation from a research perspective, but we're trying to work with different sectors. So that's creating new forms of business in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Lorinda, for your question, and thank you, Ramon, for your insight. Okay, so community engagement. You mentioned that, and we all see this, and we all know this, that in the public health sector, there's this huge window open now, and this extra value add. There was always a value to it, but this extra value add to community engagement. So think about some of the traditional community engagement models. What, in your opinion, what needs to be changed? What are some opportunities for innovation? I know that we are embracing community health workers, and so I know that's an opportunity, but what other opportunities do you see for innovation and community engagement?
Yeah. So when I think community engagement, like, I guess my first exposure to community engagement was as a health educator, right? Right after undergrad, I started working as a health educator in the community. And I think that was in the past, and that's the traditional public health model, is like health education, create awareness, and that leads to behavior change. But I think the future in terms of innovation is empowering communities to kind of solve some of these problems themselves, right? So bringing them into the fold for solution development. For example, if you are developing an app, you would want your end users to be involved in the design, right? So to make sure that they're going to use it later. I think that's a big disconnect right now. And another example is kind of leveraging the existing resources, right? So when I took a road trip back in 2018, I flew down to Miami, and then I rented a car and I drove back to Durham because I just wanted to see the parts in between the big cities. And what I noticed, like the common threads in any city, no matter what size, is that they have a gas station, they have a post office probably, and they have a church, right? So if you think about trying to scale something, I think churches are an underutilized way to do community engagement. And I think churches have been doing this in the past, but they haven't really connected with the health and public health sectors that well. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. And there's this one company that I've been talking to. It's called Reef. It's a big startup based in Miami. They raised $1.2 billion. So they raised that much money. And so they're worth a lot more. And what they've been doing is transforming underutilized parking lots into commercial kitchen locations for, let's say, Chipotle. They house extra logistics vans like UPS or Amazon vans and trucks. And also they've started thinking about how to involve healthcare. And so for COVID specifically, they were able to turn those unused parking lots into vaccination testing sites and vaccination sites. And so from a church's perspective, imagine if you're not using your parking lot for like 5-6 days a week, you can earn some revenue, and plus you can partner with some really interesting models to actually impact the community locally. So I think that's the next step of innovation, not only like community health workers, not only education, but like how do we leverage like technology and some of these other startups or, really innovative thinking leaders to actually bring that and bring change at the local level.
Yeah, so in addition to your comments about churches, I think that there is also an opportunity to build the capacity of churches and provide them technical assistance, but definitely build their capacity so that they understand and know how to work with larger institutions, and of course provide incentives for that. But even though there are opportunities with churches, I would, like with COVID in the African American community, churches were being recruited for COVID-19 messaging and for vaccination awareness and on-site clinics. However, we have to be honest. Yes, let's utilize churches, but there are a lot of people who are disconnected with the church. And a lot of people don't relate to some of the custom, conservative, original thought of churches, and so a lot of people are disconnected. So I do agree with you that the church is a medium to connect with community, but being realistically, just being honest, they're still missing a certain segment of the population. And I think in addition to, my social determinants of health statement, so in addition to those social and behavioral health, in addition to those messages, I think that there's as far as community engagement goes, a great opportunity for not just workforce development and training, and this could be at the community college level and then trade level, not just workforce development and training, but also entrepreneurship and working with communities to teach them about business, getting a business license, and kind of that capacity building for small business, really small business owners. In the past, I've applied for small business programs, and I was declined because my revenue, for example, was under $250,000 for that particular year. Or, so even though you have these larger organizations that are supporting small business, it's not the micro small business or the individual small business, but there's a lot of I think we need to focus on economic opportunity, and then and housing. And so you mentioned churches. So in this country, in addition to income, even though I do see a lot of jobs available in my field, but I know not everyone has experience or has an interest in public health or even some of those positions that are available. So I do know that job issues, I know that's a problem in this country, but also a growing problem in this country is housing affordability. And this is even happening in rural areas. And a lot of cities and counties are growing, and some of them, they don't have the infrastructure and they can't keep up. And so, and then there's the availability of land. And so and I say this to say, so speaking of churches, churches are known to own a lot of land. So that's also, so back to our original conversation about the social enterprise, there's also opportunities for churches to become social enterprises. And so, for example, use their land for affordable housing, for the construction. And so think about the economic opportunities that could be created locally for that.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned the housing piece and the economic, the job security, financial matters. So one of the partners that I'm trying to work with to address the affordable housing issue is called Republic. They're based out of LA, and they're purchasing underperforming hotels and converting them into affordable housing that meets, I think, 60 to 120% area median income. And so it's really for the workers the hourly wage workers to get supported there. And we've been talking to them around like linking to healthcare and other things to solve the social determinants of health for their future residents, right? And so some of the things that we're thinking about is, so most of these hotels have a commercial kitchen on site, and then they have like conference or meeting space. And so what can we do with those extra auxiliary spaces? And we've been thinking, how do we bring healthcare dollars into the mix? So how do we get nonprofit hospitals or even payers, insurance companies, knowing that this population is, 60 to 120% AMI, how do we get them engaged and like providing any extra services, whether it's, direct, like clinical, like telehealth, or like social services, like financial assistance or financial, I guess, education, workforce development opportunities, upskilling opportunities, or even like bringing social service providers or community-based organizations into like a space. They have maybe like a small little office space or like a hub, so that they can kind of engage with the residents once or twice a week. So we're really thinking about how do we solve these things with existing companies working on them, but like really adding the extra social determinants of health angle. And really, I mean, it's for them, it's actually a business case, because if these residents end up staying longer than the average turnover, which is about a year, that's the biggest expense from a landlord perspective. And so it's actually helping the investment even further.
Okay. We have a question in the audience. We have a question from Dr. Raymond Samuel, and he is a researcher at North Carolina A&T, and he's also a social entrepreneur. And so we'll have a question for him. I'll pose the question from him, and then also Lorinda McKelvey in Chicago. She has a question. But just really quick before we move on, what's your opinion on guaranteed income?
Yeah, I like the idea of it. I know politically, it's probably hasn't worked, but if you think about what we've managed to do during COVID, the pandemic, we've given people $3,000, right? And so that's kind of like a similar concept, right? So if you're willing to take $3,000 during the pandemic, why can't you take that during any other year, non-pandemic years? And so I'm supportive of it. I've been really watching the experiment go on in Stockton, and then also been reading a lot from like Andrew Yang's UBI trials, and there have been a lot of other smaller trials that are financed either by a foundation or a private donor. I think that from a public health perspective, I think financial issues are more impactful than we actually know. I don't think there's a lot of research on like the financial stress to health outcomes. I don't think there's some direct correlation there, but I think it does impact a lot of your thinking, right? So if you're super stressed, you're not able to make great decisions, and that affects like productivity. That affects a lot of different things, in addition to potentially like chronic diseases. So I guess to summarize, I support it. I just don't know how it's going to move forward politically.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And so Dr. Samuel's question, one of his questions, his first one, what tools can someone use to determine whether to go nonprofit versus for-profit, community-based organization or non-governmental organization enterprise?
I mean, I think I've seen a lot of, like, I don't know if there's any specific tools, but I've done a lot of research about it, and I've talked to a lot of folks. I think the benefits of incorporating as a nonprofit is access to grant money, right? So I think you have a little bit more leeway on startup capital. But from a social enterprise perspective, I think you just have a little bit more control at the beginning, right? So you don't have to have a nonprofit board that has to like be essentially your governing body, right? So everything has to be approved by the board, and that could take a while, depending on your board and how often they meet. So I think if you're trying to go fast, and if you're trying to make decisions in a quicker manner, and if you're trying to innovate really quickly or pivot really quickly, I think a social enterprise like an LLC would be the quickest way to do that. It just depends where you are financially, and I think in terms of control, like what's your comfort level on control. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons to either way, but if you even start out as a for-profit entity, you can always start a nonprofit arm of that. So I don't think that should be a limitation to just moving forward.
Yeah, I was going to say that you actually can have both as long as they are separate organizations, separate entities, no connection financially. Yeah, so as long as they're separate, you can have both. But also, what a lot of people don't understand when they start a nonprofit organization, and I'm talking specifically about a 501c3, is that yes, you are the founder and the executive director, but you do not own a nonprofit organization, and your board can fire you. There are ways to develop your charter or your nonprofit. I can't think of the term right now, but charter is the best for right now that I can think of. But anyway, for your documentation of how you organize your articles of incorporation or whatever your paperwork are, you can structure that way. And I would, of course, advise, I will have counsel on that, a legal counsel. But there is a way, to my understanding, so where you can make it a little bit harder for your board to fire you, but a nonprofit organization, even when it's dissolved, those assets of that nonprofit organization goes to another nonprofit organization. It doesn't go to an individual. So those are things to consider as well when you're comparing that business, that for-profit versus that nonprofit. And then Lorinda McKelvey, what are some effective ways to approach measuring the impact a community engagement initiative has on community? I feel partners and stakeholders want to ensure they're getting the most bang for their buck. And this is a great segue to that evaluation question that I had for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it starts with really good planning on the front end, right? So really understanding what kind of impact you want to be making. And then kind of building in ways to measure that. So one thing that I've been advising CCPH on is doing a lot of follow-up, like either interviews or just conversations and checking in regularly with former partners, like past partners or current or potentially future ones. It's like, hey, like what have we done well? What haven't we done well? What do we need to improve on? And then how do we really capture that in terms of, because so CCPH is not like engaging with the end user populations, right? So we're kind of like, hey, we're working with smaller nonprofits that are local and kind of organizing and convening them around certain projects. And so those smaller nonprofits are the ones with the direct engagement. They're directly engaged with the end user audience. And so going back to them and asking them like, hey, what did you guys see from a result standpoint? Like, did we manage to impact heart disease, or did we increase healthcare utilization by X amount? So I think number one is just really following up and understanding what your partners have seen, and then being able to like capture all that in a way so that you can tell a bigger story later on like larger impact, right? So all your projects together in 2020, we did this. And I don't see a lot of nonprofits or usually nonprofits doing this. I think for-profits do a better job of like really keeping track of their successes, because I mean, it starts piling up. And if you haven't done a good job of like keeping track, then it's harder to tell that comprehensive story later on.
So Ramon, we are at time. I do have a closing comment based off of what you said. And then Dr. Samuel, really quick, he has a question. What's the name of the startup that was doing the, that is doing the parking lot utilization? And are they, I'm sorry.
Sorry, it's called Reef Technology.
Okay. And do you know if they are minority owned?
I don't think they are.
Okay. And so, so this is a follow-up to the evaluation comment that you just made. And so in evaluation, you have formative evaluation, and then you have summative. And so in my opinion, what you just described is more so summative, you know, the follow-up towards the end. This is what we've done. We're, you know, this is what we invested. These were our inputs, and these were our short, medium-term, and long-term outcomes. If you can even, in fact, measure long-term outcomes. Sometimes it's not realistic. It depends on that project period or that funding period. Sometimes it's not realistic to measure long-term or impact per se. However, with formative, and I actually, I like to use formative approaches. And so with formative, it's more so think about versus outcome, think about the monitoring. And so while you're doing the community engagement, and so you're, again, like you said, it starts with planning, right? So you have the plans, they have their objectives, but just the process of community engagement, the process of working with the partners, what's working well now, what's not working, what do we need to shift, and then documenting that. So later on, it can be a part of the summative, and it could be a part of some of the lessons learned that we can share with our peers. I think that's very important. And we have Shantu checking in on YouTube from Prince George's County. Thank you. Everyone, our time is up. I want to respect your time. I kind of designed these to be short chats. Ramon, you were very, very insightful. I appreciate the fact that I'm taking a chance. These are live, unscripted. So I really, we met one time. I looked at your bio. I tried to vet you the best that I could. But really, you could have bombed. You could have totally bombed this interview. But I just speaking to you, you have, for myself and others, I like the fact that you're well informed. You cite case studies. You know what others are doing in the industry. You're well read, and I can tell that you're active in the industry and what you're talking about. And it's not just a desire. Oh, I can do this. So that public health consultant that we talked about earlier, that is kind of like the jack of all trades, right? So I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your time. And Dr. Samuel, you can connect with Ramon, or anyone, please do connect with Ramon on LinkedIn. His screen name is on the screen, Ramon Llamas. And also, Ramon, if you don't mind going into the LinkedIn video portion of this and then entering your contact information so people can follow up with you. I would really appreciate that. And everyone, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, again, connect with Ramon. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile name is Shawnta Jackson, MPH. You can learn more about me at shawntajackson.com. And you can learn more about my business at causeengagement.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.